In this presentation, I'm going to talk about the calculation of piecework earnings. So some employees are not paid by the hour they work, but instead they're paid by the piece they produce or process. So these employees are called piece workers, and the earnings they earn are called piecework earnings. So examples of people that might get paid like this are maybe in manufacturing. Let's say that somebody makes doorknobs, so they might get paid by the doorknob that they make. Or let's say you're a quality control inspector, so maybe you get paid by the pieces that you inspect. Okay, so there's specific ways that we have to calculate piecework earnings. Okay, so one is when you calculate their earnings, it still has to equal their minimum wage, okay, with overtime. So let's say that an employee worked 43 hours. Well, when they calculate their piecework earnings, it still has to equal what minimum wage is, which is $7.25 an hour, plus what overtime would be, plus overtime on top of $7.25. So they still have to be paid minimum wage and overtime based on the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's just you calculate it differently. So normally what happens is you go ahead and calculate piecework earnings and then make sure that they are being paid at least minimum wage. Okay, so and hopefully employers have figured out that if they pay a certain piecework rate, that will give their workers at least minimum wage. Okay, so there's two methods to calculate piecework earnings. One is we call method A, and it is basically the main focus here is hours worked. Okay, so here the main focus is hours worked. Okay, and so here what you do is you take all of the units produced, whether in regular time or overtime, and you multiply by the unit piece rate, and that gives us what we call our regular earnings. And then you take those regular earnings and you have to calculate an hourly rate by dividing by their total hours. This includes overtime. Okay, so this total hours includes overtime hours. So then you calculate the overtime premium. Notice this is a premium, so remember that's our 0.5. You'll take the hourly rate times the 0.5 to calculate an overtime premium. The reason why it's an overtime premium is because we've already figured out our hourly rate based on total hours, which includes our overtime hours. So then all that's left to worry about is the 0.5. And then we calculate our gross paid by taking regular earnings plus our overtime premium times our overtime hours. Okay, and then there's another method, and they don't produce the same results. Okay, but method B is all about, it's focused on the pieces. So you pick which method you want to use based on the information you're given. So if you're given the total number of pieces and you're given how many hours they worked, overtime or regular, then you're going to use method A. If you're given the number of pieces made in regular time and how many pieces are made in overtime, then you can use method B. And here, it's actually the easier of the two. You take the units produced in regular time times the normal piece rate, and then you add to that the units produced in overtime, where you've multiplied that by 1.5 times the piece rate. So let's look at a few examples. And we're going to, for these examples, I give you enough information to calculate based on method A or method B, but sometimes you're only going to be given the information to do one or the other, so you might have to figure out which one you can use. Again, method A is based on hours, so if you're given hours, you're going to use method A. If you're only given pieces information, then you're going to use method B. Okay, so here we've got 4812 units inspected in a 47.25-hour work week, so they did work overtime. 600 of these units were produced in extra hours. Employee is paid 12 cents a unit. Calculate gross pay using both methods. So here, under the method A, I might not even tell you this information. Okay, I might just tell you that the 4812 units were inspected in a 47.25-hour week, and they're paid 12 cents a unit. Okay, so let's figure it out using method A. Okay, so to do that, we're going to figure out their regular hours. We're going to take all 4812 units and multiply it by that normal piece rate per unit. So that gives us 577.44. Okay, then from that we can calculate their hourly rate. So we'll take 577.44. How long did it take us to make that? 47.25 hours. So we'll divide that by 47.25, and that gives us a 12.22 hourly rate. So then we can calculate the overtime premium. Notice that we only need to worry about 0.5 because our overtime hours, 7.25 overtime hours, are already used to calculate this rate. So our 1 of our 1.5 is already in this calculation, and all we need is the 0.5. So now we'll take the 12.22 times 0.5, and that gives us an overtime premium of $6.11. So therefore we can calculate their overtime pay. How many overtime hours did they work? 7.25 times that $6.11 overtime premium gives us overtime of $44.30. So therefore their gross pay, we'll take that 577.44 that we calculated up there, plus our $44.30 that we calculated for overtime, and that gives us $621.74. Okay, now let's look at method B here. So method B, we're more worried about units. So we know we inspected a total of 4812 units, and 600 of those units were in overtime. So how much were you made in regular time? Well, I can take my total 4812 minus my 600 that were made in overtime. So I must have made 4,212 in regular time. So what I'll do here is I'll figure out, okay, well, what's our regular pay? So I'll take what I made in regular time, 4212, times just 12 cents a unit, and that gives me 505.44. And then let's figure out what they got paid in overtime. They made 600 units in overtime. They normally get paid 12 cents per unit, but since it's overtime, we're going to times that by 1.5. So therefore, they get paid 108 for overtime. So therefore, my gross pay in this case is, we add those two together, and we get 613.44. So notice that if they get paid based on method A, they get 621.74. For method B, they get 613.44. Okay, let's look at one more example. So here we've got somebody that inspects things for quality. They get paid 8 cents per unit that they inspect. An employee inspected 6,897 units in 43.5 hours. She inspected 423 of these in overtime. Calculate using both methods. So first, again, we're going to use method A. And so here we're going to use all units. So we'll figure out her regular pay, $68.97, all units, so what she made in regular time and overtime. So $68.97 times her 0.08 a unit gives me $551.76. So then I can calculate the hourly rate by taking 551.76. How many total hours did she work? 43.5. So 551.76 divided by 43.5, sorry, it is 1268. And so therefore, my overtime rate, really it's a premium, right? Because I've already factored in my overtime hours up here. So I'm going to take 1268 times 0.5, it gives me 634. So my overtime pay is going to be 634 times, how many hours did she work overtime? 3.5. So that's going to be $22.19. So my gross pay going to be the 551.76 that I calculated up here, plus my 22.19 is going to be 573.95. Okay, let's calculate it for method B. So again, method B is all about my pieces. When were they made? So I inspected 6,897 units, and I inspected 423 of those in overtime. So I can subtract the overtime from the total to calculate what I made in regular time. So 64.74 in regular time. So let's figure out my regular pay. Then I would take my 64.74 units made in regular time and calculate by multiply by 0.08, and I get 517.92. And then I've got my overtime. How many did I make in overtime? 423. I still get 8 cents, but I get 1.5 times that 8 cents. So that'd be 50.76. So my gross pay, I'm going to add those two together, and I get 568.68. Again, they come up with different answers, okay, which is fine, but you just have to, you're going to, in real life, you would know, you would have a policy in place, but if you kept up with hours, if you kept up with total pieces and hours, you would use method A. If you kept up with pieces, like when you created the different pieces, then you would use method B.